Okay, we'll go ahead and get started for today. I'll be your host this afternoon. I'm Patricia Leopold, a climate adaptation specialist with the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. And also we have with us Stephen Handler, your usual lecturer, and Steve Harris, also representing NIACS today. And just as a reminder, our lectures are recorded. Please keep your microphones muted just to reduce any background noise, but feel free to unmute them at appropriate times to ask questions. Following the lecture today, I will make a video and I will send the link to the recorded video in the newsletter, which will follow the bonus lecture that we'll have tomorrow. So more on that later. So for today's agenda, first we'll cover step 3, make sure everybody's up to speed on that. Then we'll dive into some adaptation options and how to select adaptation actions. We'll provide a step 4 introduction, and we'll also cover your assignments for next week. So congratulations, you completed step 3, evaluating management objectives considering climate change. So remember, this is the step where you brought together your management goals and objectives that you identified in step 1, and also the climate impacts that you identified in step 2, in order to think about how climate change will affect your management goals and objectives. And in step 3, you weighed the challenges that you came up with against the opportunities that climate change presents to determine the feasibility of meeting your management objectives under current management with the current tools that you kind of have in your management toolbox. So this step can sometimes feel a little too similar to step number 2, but remember that step number 2 focuses on how climate change affects your particular site and your site conditions. And then step 3 identifies how those site vulnerabilities can affect the likelihood of meeting your management goals. So kind of thinking about the physical conditions and then the physical conditions being able to improve the or devolve the success of meeting your management goals and objectives. So we really want to hear more about what you came up with in step number 3, and we'll have a chance to explore those impacts that you thought about in step 2 and the challenges, opportunities, and feasibilities of your management objectives from step 3 in our next discussion session. So this week, we will identify appropriate climate adaptation approaches and tactics that can help us respond to those climate-related challenges and opportunities, as well as those local site vulnerabilities that climate change presents. So we're diving into step number 4. And a key part of step number 4 is the menu of adaptation strategies and approaches, which is another resource that NIACS has developed to be part of this process. And so step 4 asks the key question: what actions can enhance the ability of the project area to adapt to anticipated changes and meet management goals? And so here we're really trying to decide what you're going to do. So what's your plan? How are you going to respond to climate change vulnerabilities? So this is kind of the fun part, the choose your own adventure part of the adaptation workbook. And for some of us, this might feel like we're being dumped into the deep end, and it might be a little challenging to see a path forward. So that's why we have these tools like the adaptation menus to help with the brainstorming process. So we'll get you out of that deep end and back in the boat. So this menu that we're talking about is the Adaptation Strategies and Approaches menu. You can find it embedded right in the adaptation workbook, or you can find it in chapters 3 and 4 of the Forest Adaptation Resources document. And this is really just an organized list of possible actions that you can pick and choose from to apply to your particular situation. So just like a menu at a restaurant, you wouldn't order everything off the menu. It would be too much and a lot of it would go to waste, or maybe you don't even like it. So you really want to use the adaptation menus to pick the strategies and the approaches that make the most sense for meeting your goals and objectives and addressing the climate change impacts that are relevant to your particular location. So there's a number of adaptation menus out there, and they're all specific to a particular discipline. I'll talk more about this later. They're organized in this hierarchy from broad adaptation strategy to a more specific approach that basically tells you how to implement that strategy. And then finally, we have the tactic level. And that tactic level, we provide some examples of what a tactic looks like, but that's where you come up with the details of how you would implement that approach and strategy. So it's kind of like instructions to your technicians or your volunteers or your employees who are carrying out your plan. And these menus just provide really thorough and comprehensive adaptation ideas. And some of them might conflict with each other, and it's up to you to decide really what works best for your particular area. And so some of the benefits of using the menu of strategies and approaches is that, it takes all of these broad, wish-washy ideas about climate change and it connects them to really specific on-the-ground actions that you can implement. And it allows you to connect the dots between those ideas and your actions so that you can show this really obvious intention of addressing a climate change impact in order to shape an outcome that you desire. It can also help you communicate your ideas to your coworkers, your stakeholders, whoever else you're engaging on this idea, to put these ideas into words and to build kind of a story about what you're doing. And really, one of the greatest benefits of the menus is to provide examples of adaptation to show you what that could look like so that you can build on those ideas and really create something that's unique and useful to your adaptation project. So there's a number of different menus. They're all focused on, different disciplines or different topic areas. And some of these menus, like the adaptation menu for wildlife management, some of these are integrated right into the adaptation workbook. And when you were setting up your course project in adaptation workbook, you selected that wildlife management button that imported that menu right into your project. And if you didn't do that, no big deal. We can work around that. And there's additional menus on our website that have not been implemented into the adaptation workbook. And you could still use those particular menus if you wanted to. You would just have to view those in a separate browser window, copy and paste those in as new strategies and approaches and tactics. And so if there are other menus that you would like to use, that's exactly what you would do. Included in the online workbook, we have forestry, urban forestry. We have forest carbon management, which is one of our newer menus, and also the wildlife management menu is one of our newest ones. And so you'll see There's other published menus, and then there's a few in preparation that we also have available. So if any of those topics are interesting to you, it's okay to use one or more adaptation menus. So if you have, for example, a project that is really focused on wildlife management, but also has a strong recreation component or a forest carbon management component, you could certainly look at those adaptation menus and use those to get more ideas about what might really set your project up to be more successful. So we encourage you to look at all those different adaptation menus, or just focus on the wildlife management menu if that's what you choose to do. And so a main source of information on climate adaptation is one of our other co-instructors, Olivia Ledee. She will be presenting on climate adaptation for wildlife during a bonus session, a lecture tomorrow, March 29th. It's at 11 a.m. Eastern. Last week's newsletter had the link to attend. You should have also gotten a calendar invite for this, but if you need another one, just let me know. And then we just attend using the normal Zoom room that we use for this lecture. So Olivia is going to be introducing some more details about the wildlife adaptation menu. She'll be talking about some broad adaptation concepts and maybe even some other really cool resources from her expertise and background that you can use to integrate into your adaptation project. So please join us if you can. It will be recorded, and I'll send that link out with the newsletter right as soon as I can after this bonus lecture. And so adaptation actions. We know that a lot of the information that is out there are kind of big and lofty, abstract ideas. So one of the frameworks that we commonly use is this resistance, resilience, and transition framework. So when thinking about adaptation, we like to think about these broad adaptation options first, just to really set our mindset about what it is we're trying to do with our project. So resistance, resilience, and transition are lying on a spectrum, and that spectrum really covers a range of, really wanting to keep things the same versus really helping a system change. And so you can see there's a lot of gray area between those two mindsets. So resistance is all about improving the defenses of the improving the defenses of the forest against change and disturbance, really preventing climate change from having an impact as much as possible, and maintaining relatively unchanged conditions in your system. So we just don't want any sign of disturbance, and we want to prevent that for as long as possible. And, you might think resistance is probably best employed in the short term, because the farther out you go in that timeline, we're more likely to see more extreme climate change, or will not be able to ward off those impacts of climate change. Resilience then recognizes that climate change impacts are maybe already happening at your site or are likely to happen in the near term. And so we're really thinking about how do we accommodate some of that disturbance so that the disturbance can happen, but our system is healthy and vigorous and set up to return to its normal state following that disturbance. And so resilience is all about really minimizing long-term negative effects of climate change. And then the transition option is recognizing that climate change is having a large negative impact on your current system, and there is a need to help that system change to something that is more in line with the future climate. And it's really enabling that ecosystem to be persistent as a healthy ecosystem, even if it doesn't necessarily look like the ecosystem that you started with. And so I think the idea here is to maintain ecosystem function for as long as possible, even if the key players might need to change a little bit. And so just getting those ideas right in your head about your project will really help you when you sit down and think about the menus of strategies and approaches. So you'll be able to select those strategies and approaches that either reduce impacts and help maintain current conditions, or if you want to look for those that are more forward thinking and really intentionally facilitate big changes in your forest ecosystems. And so you do have some homework that goes over these ideas. This is a 27-minute video on adaptation concepts and the adaptation menus. This will help you understand the background and the potential adaptation pathways of the different tools that we use in this step. So the menus will really help us link our real world tactics that we're going to develop in this step to these broad adaptation options. It's going to help us set context and rationale for the adaptation tactics that each of us will devise. So yeah, the video, it dives into each of these adaptations and more, including some examples. And so that is in your syllabus, and we sent that out in the newsletter as well. And I'll send it out in a reminder newsletter this week. And so this whole step, including the adaptation menus, are part of this logical thought train. And so we've used the term connecting the dots before. So this step is really key in connecting our dots between our goals and objectives and what we're trying to do. And then those climate change impacts that are affecting our site and how those site conditions affect our ability to meet those goals and objectives. And now in this step, we are adopting adaptation actions that address those challenges and impacts and make it more likely that we will be able to meet those goals and objectives. And so it's really just another step in this set of steps that intentionally define our plan forward. And so we've been doing this for a while. We've worked with numerous landowners across the US in different ecosystem types with different management goals and objectives, different site conditions, different concerns. Even within an organization, they have different tools and opportunities. And so we've really gotten a good sense of what these adaptation actions are looking like. And so a lot of the adaptation actions that we tend to see are management actions that are being implemented, but climate change just makes them that much more important, because these standard management actions that we always use are actually addressing a climate change impact or a challenge or opportunity. So these are things that are already in your toolbox, but they're being used in very specific ways that address climate change. And you want to give yourself credit for those. those management actions. Even if you had already planned on doing that before you took your course, if you can see those dots connected, then you'll want to craft that into an adaptation action and not just a management action. A smaller proportion of the adaptation actions that we see are small tweaks that are the same actions, but just a little bit different, so that they're even more effective at improving your odds of meeting your management objectives. So it's kind of like taking that management action and then just changing it a little bit to become an adaptation action. And then, every course is a little bit different, but the smallest set of actions that we tend to see are those that are considered new and different, or even wild and crazy. So these are actions that you have not ever used in your management before. There's something new that you're going to try. And I will point out here that what is new and different for you might be one of those same actions or small tweaks for somebody else in this course. And so you really can't compare yourself to anybody else when you're making these decisions and you're thinking about how to tackle climate change. This is just, I hope, helpful for you to see that a lot of the things that you're doing now can be adjusted just a little bit to help with climate change. And so as we move into finishing step 4, or I guess beginning step 4, we're looking at identifying adaptation approaches and tactics for implementation, and we're asking the key question: what actions can help enhance the ability of the project area to meet anticipated changes and then also help meet management goals? And so in this step, you'll see a couple of key terms. First, we have our approach. And so this is an item that you will select from the menu. So the menu has strategies and approaches. If you're looking at the one-page menu, you'll just see strategies and approaches. If you're looking at the full published article or chapter for that menu, you'll also see example tactics. So it's worth it to look at that longer document. So you'll select from the menu that approach, and you'll just read through them all and think about any and all of them that seem to make sense and help address the challenges for your particular project. So just pull those out, even if you're not sure about them right now, and set those aside. Next, you'll identify your tactic. And so this tactic describes the specific action that you can take to implement that approach. And so when you write your tactic, you'll usually include details about what, where, and how you will implement actions. If you're talking about, for example, planting a diversity of native tree species at this site, you would probably also include the details about what native tree species, where exactly, at what density or planting level, and how you might do that. What's the pattern or design? And then you'll also identify your time frame for implementing your tactic, and you can do that a number of ways. For example, you might be thinking about the wildlife menu strategy number 3, approach number 1, which is all about facilitating shifts in the geographic range of species in anticipation of future conditions, right? Pretty simple. So facilitating range shifts. So you decide that your tactic is to maybe orient pollinator projects to create private land stepping stones through rural and urban landscapes. And another tactic might be to create infrastructure for wildlife habitat, or for wildlife to cross, like highways or other obstructions or fragmented habitat. So you can see how, you step down from that approach and just get a little more specific about how you might do that. And so for your time frame here, you're including details like, when this item happens, then this will happen, or you're including details about after a harvest maybe, or after a planting, or you can identify specific, if you have worked out, a calendar for your project, you can identify those specific timings, like, the summer of 2022. I think we need to update this slide, or whatever it is. And so another part of this step is to describe your benefits, or why this tactic would be effective. And so you want to think about whether this tactic addresses your biggest challenge, or if it addresses multiple challenges. If it's something that is affordable and doable without applying a lot of extra resources to it, if it has any co-benefits, and whether it's likely to succeed. So just think about, if you implement this tactic, like maybe what are those resources you could bring in to support it, or, what else could really make your case for implementing this action. And at the same time, we also want to think about our drawbacks and barriers of implementing this tactic. So why might it not be such a good idea? And you might want to think about whether it has any negative side effects, if it requires extra money or extra staff time, if it for any other reason might not be successful, or if it has any other barriers. We don't want you to limit yourself too much, though. So we want you to think about everything that makes sense, weigh those benefits, drawbacks, and barriers, and get all of that information recorded so that in the final step, we can really decide whether we'll go forward with that information or not. So it's good to really be expansive, think about anything and everything that might make sense, but wait and don't write it off right away before you get to the next step. So as a almost final step, as part of step 4, we'll rate the practicability of implementing this tactic. And so here is where we ask the question, is it effective? Okay. Is it feasible? Okay. So if you can say yes to both, then you have high practicability. And if you say no, obviously you have low practicability. So this is just a quick way to kind of rate your effectiveness and your feasibility, so that when you get to the final step of part 4, we can decide whether we recommend our tactic or not. And so when we're thinking about recommending a tactic, we're really thinking about considering those trade-offs between the benefits and the drawbacks, the effectiveness and the feasibility, and deciding, yes, now is the right time and this is the right place to implement this tactic, or no, this might not be the best tactic at this time, but it's good that you captured that information. Again, especially for longevity, if you show people that you have considered numerous options and then ruled some of them out, you might be able to tell a more complete story about why you did choose the adaptation tactics that you did. So it's just another way to really record your whole thought process and all the work that you put into this adaptation plan. Okay, so that was step 4 in a nutshell. And next, I would like to go through an adaptation project for you as an example so that you can see, again, how all of these different steps fit together. And keep in mind that we'll be having you kind of do a even shorter version of these 5 slides to introduce your project at the end of this course. So just keep that in the back of your heads. And so this is an adaptation project that was completed in the Central Platte River in Nebraska. And so this region provides critical habitat for wildlife in the region, including about 500,000 cranes during seasonal migration in the spring. So for this project, multiple organizations banded together to think about how to address climate change and improve habitat in a 549-acre area of this river valley. And those partners included the Nature Conservancy, the Crane Trust, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. So in step 1, managers define their goals and objectives. And so for this project, they're really looking at improving habitat for the sandhill cranes and other wildlife, and they're promoting habitat compatible agricultural practices. And so some of their more specific objectives were to increase meadow cover, so more than 30%, and then reduce the woodland cover to less than 30% within an 800-meter buffer zone of the river. They want to increase the river channel width to 200 meters, improve soil fertility, and then convert a large proportion of the row crops to crane-friendly food items such as wheat, barley, alfalfa, and corn. And another broad goal for this project is to demonstrate the benefits of sustainable ag practices to the farmers and ranchers in this greater area. And so some of those benefits they want to communicate are potential increases in cattle forage, greater crop yield, reduced fertilizer, and probably reduced runoff as well. And then some other fun facts for this project. It's actually only a 10-minute drive from downtown St. Paul. So it's one of the largest natural parks in the city, and it gets over 500,000 visitors on an annual basis. So it is quite accessible and a great place to see a lot of birds at once. And so in the second step, they identified their key climate change impacts for this region. And so that included, shifts in crane migration and overwintering patterns because of those warmer winters, a reduction in ice jams. And those ice jams are really important for maintaining the river's wide open character. They're really seeing a lot of increased pressures from insect pests and cool season invasive plants. They're seeing a shift in the timing of floods and the subsequent scouring that comes along with those floods. And they're really seeing a lot more low flow days in the summer, which is unfortunately leading to vegetation encroachment in the river channel. So in step 3, they identified their challenges and opportunities. And so as challenges go, they were thinking that these climate changes might require more irrigation for the row crops, which would just, exacerbate issues with those low flow periods and make woody encroachment more likely. And then along with that, having invasive species invade the river corridor. They did identify some opportunities as well. And so changes in the flooding regime might restore some of the natural disturbance to the floodplain, which is, again, that scouring is important to maintaining the structure of the river. And then another opportunity is potentially a longer growing season could increase the cattle forage. And so then in step 4, they identified specific tactics to address those impacts and challenges. And here they use the wildlife adaptation menu. So you can see here that the selected adaptation actions address their challenges and opportunities that we just looked at. So it considers their anticipated climate impacts, and they're designed to help reach their stated goals and objectives. So this project came up with really a large number of adaptation actions. And so here we've highlighted a few that fall into the resistance, resilience, and transition categories. So this project has a little bit of all three, maybe thinking about the near term as well as the longer term climate changes they're anticipating. So again, the approach came straight from the menu, while the team actually designed the adaptation tactic or how to implement that approach. And here you can see, they could have really gotten a little more specific, I think. So under resistance, we have strategy 11, approach 5, which is managing public or private agricultural land to provide compatible wildlife use. And some of the tactics there are to encourage no-till agriculture and cover crops in the Central Platte watershed, and to promote precision agriculture techniques to reduce the input of fertilizer, fuel, and water. And, just critiquing this tactic, I would want to know, what are those precision agriculture techniques? The option for resilience is to maintain or mimic natural disturbance regimes to enhance habitat quality. And so here they'll do that by creating disturbances at suitable seasons to boost floristic quality and biodiversity in meadows. And here they provide examples such as grazing in the winter, okay, and prescribed fire in the summer as opposed to the spring. So this is a good tactic that kind of explains the what, when, and how of creating those disturbances. Then when we get to the transition options, so these are really looking at, managing for plant species diversity and complexity, and creating new food sources and water and cover to align with future conditions. And so the tactic here is to replace conventional row crops with native meadow species or alternative crops that may provide a greater variety of food sources over a longer seasonal time frame. So here I would want to know, what are those meadow plants and native species or alternative crops that they would be planting, and what windows in the season are they covering, and have those species also been analyzed to have you thought about whether those species will hold up on the site within the range of expected climate changes? So you can just see here that the more specific you can get with a tactic, it's for you to really explain what you're trying to do, how you're trying to do it. And I really like to compare this to, if you have new volunteers or a technician that is working for you and you need to tell them what you want done, we really have to put it in terms of a work plan. So be as specific as possible. And We won't ask you too many questions. Okay, and then finally, step 5 is all about monitoring and evaluating effectiveness. And so to make sure that their actions are effective, this team identified a number of monitoring items to track. And so, you know, some of those included the total acres of wildlife-friendly ag practices and the hopefully downward trends in fuel and fertilizer consumption, in addition to the maybe easier metrics to track, like the crane population trends and arrival and departure dates. So in a nutshell, those are the 5 steps of the adaptation workbook. This example is posted online. So you can check that out, or you can go look at some other examples to see how different landowners on different sites have selected, you know, a number of strategies and approaches. Okay, so before we let you go for the day, I'm going to cover a few pro tips to get you started in the online workbook portion. Maybe some of you have already dived into this and have made a little progress on step 4. So just remember that these tips and more are also accessible in the reported tutorials that are embedded in each step of the workbook. So just remember to pull down that little menu to find your videos and tutorials. So first, it might be helpful to scan the multiple menus that can be viewed using the shortcut buttons at the top of your screen. You might find that although you're primarily using the wildlife management menu, you might also want to look at that recreation menu or the forest menu or the carbon menu, and you might pull in some of those strategies and approaches from another topic area. Another tip is that when a menu does catch your eye, go ahead and dive into it. Explore the approaches. Explore those example tactics in that longer version of the document. And those are always linked on our strategies page. You can access the one-page version, or you can access that longer version. So you can look at those example tactics, and just remember that those tactics aren't, you know, provided to cut and paste from. They're probably not going to work for you because they're so specific. So just look at those as, you know, just an example of one of the many ways that you could utilize that approach and strategy. And then design your own tactic around your own project needs. Then in the online workbook, you can, you know, choose your menu, add all the relevant strategies and approaches, and then link your tactics. When you write those in, you can link those right to your objectives. And the workbook makes this easy for you to do. And then finally, decide if a tactic is recommended or is not recommended. And if you'll save it as a backup plan if the situation changes. So one of the great things about the adaptation workbook is that you can print it as a PDF when you're done with it, and it will show you that you did not select those adaptation actions as well as the ones that you did. So again, this is just a great communication tool. So here's what the screen will look like when you jump into step 4. You've taken the little arrows and you've pulled those up already. And so here's where you'll see the various menus of strategies and approaches. And so the wildlife management menu will probably be listed first if you remembered to hit that button. If you didn't, again, it's not the end of the world. We can work around that. But this will just take you to that outside link where you can read the strategies and approaches in more detail. And then when you're ready to apply those menus to your project, you'll use this Add a Tactic button. And so you click that and this box pops up. And so you'll see the sector. So this is where you open it up and you'll be able to choose that wildlife management menu or one of the other pre-populated menus. And then that changes your options that you see in this strategy drop-down box. So it'll have, 10 to 12 different strategies that you can choose from that relate to that menu that you chose. And then after you pick your strategy, then you'll have 3 to 5 approaches that are now selectable, and you'll just grab the one that you had in mind to develop your tactic. And then you fill out the details of your tactic. So you describe specifically the action that you can take, the what, when, how, where you implement this action. You can add the information about your time frame, your benefits, your drawbacks and barriers, and then finally your practicability. And then you hit save, okay? And it's not until this next window pops up that you will be able to choose whether to recommend or not recommend the tactic. As a default, the tactics are set to recommend. You've done all this work, so we assume that you're going to get this far, but often you might hit that button that says, not recommended at this time. And if you choose not to recommend due to policies or work capacity or financing, there is a comment box that allows you to explain what those barriers might be. Or if you need something else to happen first before you implement this tactic, that would be a good place to explain that as well. There is a lot of uncertainty with climate change, and sometimes we have a good plan if this thing happens, but it hasn't happened yet, so we're just going to table it for now. So that's also a good use of not recommending it and writing why in that comment box. Okay, and so as a final pro tip, just remember that, you can really use that left-hand navigation panel to make sure that you are where you need to be. You have different resources available, and then you have a progress summary that you can get to, and that, you have these windows that contain your tutorials, and I think everything else that you need. In addition, your course instructors are always standing by to help you out if you get stuck or can't remember where to find something. We'll be happy to point that out for you. So I'll open it up for questions in just a minute, but I would like to give you a heads up. Our assignment for next week is to, our assignment for this week to finish before next week is to watch that presentation on adaptation concepts. It's a 27-minute recorded video. Complete your step 4. Identifying adaptation actions, and then complete the homework after step 4. So next week is April 4th already. And so please turn in your homework Monday morning at the latest. There is also some optional things you can do in addition to your primary menu that you're choosing for this course, which is the wildlife management menu. You can review other menus of strategies and approaches. You can go to our website and browse those adaptation demonstrations, and then you can also attend tomorrow's bonus lecture on wildlife adaptation. So again, presented by Olivia Ledee. it's just going to be a great way to get some of this information, even more specifically targeting wildlife management from Olivia's great bank of knowledge and expertise. And again, if you can't attend the live session, we will record this and make sure you get the link. So with that, I will open it up for questions, and I will also open it up for Stephen and Steve to let me know if I forgot to mention anything. So thanks, everybody. And you can either chat in the box or unmute and ask a question.
No comments from me. Thanks, Patricia.
Great. Just catching up on all the animal choices. So we have a few minutes left. You guys are a little bit quiet today, and that's fine. What a Monday, am I right? So if you want to catch an extra 8 minutes on your calendar, you can feel free to take off for the day, and then we'll stick around in case anybody wants to chat one-on-one. Thank you very much for your time. This is kind of a more involved step, so definitely set aside, 3 or 4 or more hours to look through those materials. And again, just let us know if you need any help at all.